Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the City Club of Portland, Portland's own citizens forum. My name is Susan Hammer, and I am president of City Club. Before we begin, I'd like to, as I always do, remind you to turn off your cell phones. We have a few announcements. Our program next Friday, on December 8th, will feature Congressman Earl Blumenauer, giving us a look at the political months ahead. It'll be a wonderful program, and I hope that you can all come. We have a few very special events coming up at City Club on Thursday, December 7th. First, we have City Club's theater series, which will continue with the Many Hats Collaborations performance of Mutt at the Interstate Firehouse Cultural Center that evening. Tickets can be purchased through City Club for $10, and they can be obtained by contacting the Cultural Center's box office. And you can get more information about this on the table in the back and in your bulletin. Before coming to Mutt, though, we hope you will join us for City Club's very first Oregon Literary Open House, which will begin at 5 o'clock at City Club and go till 8 o'clock. This event, which is sponsored by City Club's AGRA Committee, will feature 15 local authors who will read short passages from their books. Their books will be available for purchase. This event is free, open to the public, and RSVPs are not required. This Friday's forum is based on a recent issue of Oregon Future magazine, which you all have on your tables. And Oregon Future has co-sponsored this event with us. The Oregon Future magazine recently published an issue on school choice, which was co-edited by our speakers today. This is really fascinating reading. We hope you'll take a look at the copy that's on your table. The two other Education Forum series that were published by Oregon Futures, as well as the 10th anniversary issue with an article on civic engagement by our City Club Executive Director, Wendy Rodmacher-Willis, are available for purchase in the back at the table that Doreen Rose is at over there on the left. And, by the way, to celebrate the 10th anniversary of a nonpartisan discussion on important policy issues, Oregon Futures is announcing today that it has a name change that will debut in 2007. The magazine cover will now be called Sockeye. And so we at City Club would like to congratulate our partners. Oh, we have an unveiling here, okay, for 10 great years. We hope there will be many more, and to see the back issues, if you haven't received them, you can go to www.sockeyemagazine.org for more information. We have one more anniversary celebration involving a City Club partner, and that is with Portland Community TV. Every week, at least 4 times, they rebroadcast our program here today, allowing us to share our programs with thousands of people in the Portland area. So PCTV is celebrating their 25th anniversary, and we want to congratulate them and thank them for working with City Club. We have one new member here at City Club today, and I'd like to welcome Doug Morgan. Please join me in welcoming Doug. And on the subject of new members, today we are going to waive the $25 new membership fee with the hope that you will give the gift of civic engagement at City Club to a loved one or even to yourself as a holiday gift. You can get applications on the back table. Our sponsors this quarter, making these programs possible, are Baron Liebman, LLP, and Zimmer Gunzel Frasca Partnership. Please join me in thanking our sponsors. Back in the days when many of us went to school, school choice wasn't really very common in our vocabulary. The norm was to go to a neighborhood public school or the school closest to our home, grades 1 through 12. Today in Portland, only 84% of Portland school children attend public schools, and the rest are doing something else. Only 50% of high school students in Portland go to their neighborhood public school. There are many more choices. Private schools, both non-denominational and denominational, homeschooling, magnet schools, charter schools, and more. Today, our program will focus on school choice, liberty, and equity. Each of our presenters today is passionate about education. Each is an innovator, each is a leader. And this is the first time that they have all appeared together in a public forum. Our panelists today, on my immediate right, are Dr. Peter Cookson, on the far end of the table, Rob Kremer, and in the middle, Cynthia Guyer, who will be our moderator. Peter Cookson is Dean of the Lewis and Clark Graduate School of Education. He came to Lewis and Clark after serving as president of the Doris Dillon Center and Teachers College Innovations at Columbia University's Teachers College. Peter has spent his life as an educator, first as an elementary school teacher, later as a high school teacher, and get this, Peter was literally the Lord of the Flies. Yes, he was head of the Port Antonio Jamaican School of the Boys, where in the late 80s, the second version of Lord of the Flies was filmed. How about that? Peter has a national research reputation in the area of school choice. He's written extensively on the subject, including a recent book on charter schools. He is currently writing a book about standardized testing. Welcome, Peter. Rob Kremer is president of the Oregon Education Coalition. He's executive director of the Oregon Charter School Service Center and co-founder of the Arthur Academy Neighborhood Public Schools. Rob is a shining example of an Oregonian who saw a need, took action, and worked to make a difference. About a decade ago, with a background as an investment banker in Chicago, with a father who was a principal at Beaverton High, and now with school-age kids in Oregon, Rob became interested in social policy surrounding public schools. And charter school legislation had failed in Oregon in 1995 and 1997. Rob raised the money, led the lobbying effort to pass Oregon's charter school law during the 1999 legislative session. Since then, he's been directly involved in helping more than 50 charter school development projects in Oregon. Rob writes a monthly column, School Talk, in Brainstorm Northwest magazine, and he hosts a weekly radio show on KXL, among other things. And tonight, Rob will be at PGE Park to watch his son play for Lake Oswego in the state semifinals against Southridge High. Yay. Cynthia Guyer is the first executive director of the Portland Schools Foundation, having served in that capacity since 1996, after being on the founding board of directors of the foundation. Cynthia opened the office with $50,000, a donated desk and computer, and a board of civic, parent, higher education, and business leaders on her side. And many of them are here today. I've seen a parade of people come and greet her. Today, the Schools Foundation has grown to a $9 million nonprofit. The organization has helped to lead a series of successful campaigns, leveraging over $250 million in public funding for Portland School District. The foundation has raised $40 million in private funds, focusing on three priorities: closing the achievement and opportunity gap for low-income students and children of color, improving the city's public high schools, and strengthening parent and community engagement in the city's public schools. So we'll begin with Cynthia giving an overview, and then we'll have presentations from each of our panelists.
Thank you so much, Susan. Welcome to everyone, and thank you, a special thank you to the City Club for creating a public space in our community for community dialogue about issues that we care about. And I'm happy to say, with all of your support and the good citizens of Portland who voted the right way last month, that $250 million that we have helped to leverage for Portland schools alone is now close to $375 million. So we believe at the foundation that it takes a city to make great schools for all kids, and that's really the expression of what our work is about. I just wanted to say a few things about public education and education nationally, and then bring it back to Portland as context setting. Really, in the last 10 or 15 years, I think there's really two movements afoot, not only in America, the United States, but across the globe, as we all try to create world-class, excellent, and equitable education for the next generation. One of those huge forces that is afoot not just in the United States and in Oregon and Portland, but across the globe is standards-based school reform. And that really is the basic notion of setting proficiency in basic areas that we want our children to be proficient in: math, science, reading, writing, the arts, however states and our nation define those standards, that all children will succeed at. And really, many people see this movement, not only in America, but across the globe, as a civil rights agenda, because it's the first time, at least in America, where we have said as a nation, we expect all of our children, including children from Ethiopia or who arrive on our shores from Mexico, to really achieve the same expectations that we have for kids who go to Lincoln and Ainsworth, who come with great privilege to our schools. The other force that is not only brewing in our own community and across the land, but across the globe, is this issue of choice, and choice in the private sector, choice in the public sector, and it takes different formations in every community. But these really are the two framing values and forces that are undergird our conversation about quality education and how we ensure that all the next generation has access to truly excellent and equitable world-class education. Susan told you a little bit about Portland. We are exceptional in terms of how many children still in the city choose or attend public education. In many cities today, that figure has dropped to 40%, 45, 50% in the major metropolitan areas of Boston, Chicago, LA. The white constituency, upper-class constituencies have long fled public education and have gone to parochial schools, homeschooling, private schools, or moved to the suburbs. So Portland has this rare moment where, although 15% of families are choosing other options than the public system, 85% of families are still choosing to enroll their kids in the public system. But that does mean that 15% are making other choices, and if there were other choices being built, new schools being built, there might be even more erosion of people's support of public education. So with that as a framing, the standards-based proficiency movement that is afoot not only in America but the globe, and then this whole issue of choice and the public side and the private side, I think we'll start with our opening comments. And I think, Peter, are you starting? So we'll start with opening framing comments from Peter and Rob, and then we'll have 20 minutes of a conversation between the two of them, and then we'll open it up for 20 minutes of question and answers from all of you. Thank you. Peter.
Thank you, Cynthia, and thank you all in City Club and the editors of Oregon's Future, now Sockeye. Did you rename it for this debate, or did you? And I want to thank Rob, and I want to thank Cynthia, and I want to thank the City Club. If I had a title, we only have a few minutes in opening remarks, and if I had a title for my remarks, it would be that there is no escape clause in the social contract. Over Thanksgiving, my family and I went to Washington, D.C., and Susan and I have a grandson named Kai. He's 11 years old, and he's at the age where he is beginning to be interested in American history. So we went to the National Archives, where you can see the original Declaration of Independence and where you can see the original Constitution. If you've never done that, you ought to do it. It's really a beautiful thing. It's written out by hand, it's fading, and it's a privilege, and he was thrilled. It made me think of this discussion today because the founders of this country had a deep and abiding faith in public education as the cradle of democracy and the foundation of the country and the expansion of the country and the well-being of the country. Probably the greatest crusader in terms of overcoming ignorance was the founder, Thomas Jefferson. And I don't have a lot of quotes in this, but this is one that I would like to start with. Thomas Jefferson wrote to his friend Tom Tyler, "I have indeed two great measures at heart, without which no republic can maintain itself in strength. One, that of general education to enable every person to judge for themselves what will secure or endanger their freedom. Two, to divide every county into hundreds of such size that all children of each will be within reach of a central school." So the idea of a common school began from the foundation of our democracy. The founders understood that there can be no liberty, no real liberty, without equity. An equal educational opportunity is the pattern with which we weave the social fabric. Every state in the Union supports public education. The U.S. Constitution and the 14th Amendment, which is the equal protection of the law, supports public education. This grand story of American public education is remarkable and has been a shining light to the rest of the world. It has stood us in good stead, in good times and bad times, in peace and war, prosperity and depression. And it has been the door which a nation of immigrants has passed through in order to become American citizens, and it still serves that function. But there is a shadow reality to this story. If you are poor, or if you are African American, or if you recently arrived in the United States, equal educational opportunity, by and large, does not apply to you. There are a few states in the United States where the criminal justice system projects the number of prison beds that will be needed in the future based on the percent of third-grade students reading to grade levels. That's how powerful a predictor it is about someone's social future. This is a huge civil rights issue, and it's with us today, and it's been with us since the founding of our democracy. Beginning with Brown versus the Board of Education, the struggle for the soul of American education really began. And the civil rights movement gained strength and momentum through the 50s and 60s and into the 70s. And one of the issues in the civil rights movement was the inadequacy of public education for African Americans, for minorities, and for poor students. I myself had a chance to see the beginnings of this battle. I was a caseworker in the late 70s in Ocean Hill-Brownsville, which is part of Brooklyn in New York. It's an entirely African American community. And the battle between the parents and the teachers union made quite a stir. And what I learned from watching that was how deeply those parents cared about their kids, how deeply they cared about those schools. And it was really a seed which I began to understand the power of parental choice. Well, over the last 40 years in the civil rights movement, there have been many solutions, proposed solutions to American education, all the way from preparing teachers better, better leadership, reorganizing schools more generally. There's been a variety. The standards, the standards movement, as Cynthia has pointed out. But choice has really gained momentum in the last 35, 40 years. And it ranges from a number of policy suggestions. On one hand, there are those who would like to deregulate public education through a voucher system or a similar system. Then there are the charter schools, which are essentially a quasi-market solution. Then there's control choice, which is in Boston and Cambridge, which is really designed to be a desegregation policy. And then there are choice within public schools, such as magnet schools. So there's been a huge movement. If you go on Google, you'll see there's over 50,000 research studies cited of some varying quality, but nonetheless, they're there. So what does it tell us? What have we found so far about the choice movement in the United States? We do know that parents do want choices and options within the public school system. That's clear and has actually served the public school system very well. Americans have consistently rejected the idea of a large-scale voucher program. While there's an interesting debate, and maybe Rob and I will have some discussion of it later, as a national movement, it has not really caught fire. We do know that inner-city students who attend charter schools tend to do slightly better than comparable students who attend public school, and that's no small thing. And we should think about this for a while as we think about policies for Oregon that might actually be able to use the charter school movement to improve education, particularly for poor kids. Efforts to privatize public education, which is more on this side of the equation, have not resulted in a significant number of great innovative schools, but has enabled educational management organizations to develop, many of whom are traded on the New York Stock Exchange. One of the most well-known is the Edison Project. I've had the privilege of studying and visiting many Edison schools over the last years, and while there are many great schools, I don't think there's any substantive difference to comparable high schools. And there is this desire, in many ways, because of the market, to franchise, because that's where actually the profitability lies. So overall, school choice policies do not seem to raise student achievement significantly. And that should tell us something, and here's the heart of what I would like to say today. Choice is not a silver bullet. The reason for this is that school governance is a very weak predictor of student achievement. Teacher quality and school leadership are far stronger predictors. Here in Oregon, we have roughly 70 charter schools. We have 70 charter schools, and we also have the Small Schools Initiative. We might be able to fashion a school choice policy in Oregon and perhaps here in Portland that allows for the creativity and options but still maintains the high standards. And here are a few suggestions. One, ensure that every school, whether it's a charter school or a regular school, has an innovative and high-quality curriculum. We do not discuss curriculum enough. We are in the middle of the greatest knowledge explosion in human history. We have learned more in the last 10 years than human beings learned in the previous 600 years, and at the exponential rate in which knowledge is being developed, that will even be higher. And our curriculum, I think, sometimes is a little backward-looking. We need strong leadership and well-prepared and well-supported teachers. In the end of the day, if you're a student, it's in the classroom that really makes the difference. And that's why the governance issues have some effect, but not the effect that often people hypothesize. Build on the charter school movement with the Small Schools Initiative and create smaller learning communities where kids will not fall through the cracks. This, I think, is a real value of the charter school movement because we know from research and common sense that individualized instruction is the thing that makes the difference in kids' lives. We should encourage open enrollment policies which enable disadvantaged students to cross district lines and attend high-performing schools. There can be no excellence without equity, and this could be the basis of a lot of experiments and a chance for kids who are poor or have recently arrived here to have a high-quality education. We should, Cynthia mentioned the standards movement. In my opinion, we should re-examine this testing policy because too much testing will destroy innovation. So in conclusion, if we in Oregon really dedicate ourselves to the principle of equal educational opportunity, we can be a shining light to the world, and we will be the true heirs of the founders' dream that through public education, democracy will grow and thrive. Thanks very much.
I'd like to start by thanking the City Club and also Oregon's Future Magazine, now Sockeye, for sponsoring this forum, and Dr. Cookson and Cynthia Guyer for participating here with me. One of the things I've always really appreciated about the City Club is that they take the time to analyze important public policy issues and always do it with an open mind, and I really appreciate that, and so thank you for hosting this forum. My goal today, my hope today, is that we'll discuss the issues surrounding how school choice might improve the public school system in a way that might make you think just a little bit differently about our public school system and about the reforms to it. I think you'll find that Dr. Cookson and I, while agreeing on some things, we differ on other things. And I hope that everybody understands that even though we might have opposing views on some issues, that we oppose each other in good faith. Dr. Cookson wants to improve our school system, and he knows that I want the same thing. And so it's in that spirit of good faith that I'm very happy to be here at the City Club. I'd like to start with an analogy. Imagine for a moment that you are charged with the task of completely restructuring Oregon's healthcare system. You have a totally blank slate, and you get to decide on a design for a universal healthcare system that will provide the best possible medical care for all Oregonians. Now, I'm sure in a group as intelligent, highly educated, and diverse as this, that there would be lots of different proposals, different ideas, different structures for how we would redesign and create a universal healthcare system. But I'll bet you that nobody, not a single one of you, would come up with the following suggestion. Nobody would say, I've got an idea. Let's split the state into about 200 local medical districts, and each would have an elected medical board whose job it is to operate all the clinics inside their territory. And now these medical district boards, using a political process, would decide everything having to do with what their clinics do. They would decide what medical procedures are offered. They would decide hours of operation, how many doctors and nurses, where to locate the clinics, pretty much everything. Now, let's assign patients to these clinics based on where they live. A patient has to attend the medical clinic in their neighborhood. And if that medical clinic didn't provide the medical procedure that they wanted or needed, well, it's too bad. You can't. We don't want them to go to a medical clinic in another neighborhood. Well, I don't think anybody thinks that would be a reasonable way to set up a universal healthcare system. But ironically, that's precisely how we operate our public school system. And this structure for our public school system really, it's an anachronism. It's a holdover from a 19th century society. And you know what? That system worked really well for about 100 years. It arguably created the greatest middle class in the history of the globe. But this is the 21st century. And the inherent flaws of that structure, that holdover structure from the 19th century, has now come home to roost. The problem is with this structure, it comes with certain byproducts, certain undesirable byproducts that are absolutely guaranteed by that structure. For instance, we have in our system pretty shocking inequality, a pretty shocking and shameful achievement gap. Now I ask you, what could guarantee inequality more than assigning kids to schools based on their neighborhood, based on where they live? We know neighborhoods are obviously segregated by income level and by wealth level. So if we assign kids to a school based on where they live, we will virtually guarantee we have schools that are affluent and schools with kids from families that are poor. But even worse, in our society, sadly, income is still a rough proxy for race. And so when we assign kids to schools based on where they live, we also virtually guarantee that we have racially segregated schools as well. Another byproduct of this structure is that it virtually guarantees that our schools are always and everywhere going to be ideological battlegrounds. We see this played out in our school system every single day. Now, why does it happen? It happens because we make political decisions. We make the decisions in our school system through a political process with winner take all. Whatever the issue might be, whether it's what sex education curriculum to have, or whether we allow military recruiting in our schools, whatever the issue is, one group prevails and the other group loses because whatever the decision is applied to every single school in the school district uniformly. And so we guarantee that we have a disgruntled minority, no matter what, as an artifact of how we operate the system. So what is this minority's only recourse? What do? The only thing they can do is organize together and try to prevail in that political arena and hope to be able to impose their views, their values on the rest of the schools. But if they succeed, all that does is create a different disgruntled minority, and their recourse is exactly the same thing. And so we have a system in which we guarantee that we will always have different groups basically vying to be the tyrant and be able to impose their views on everybody else. So my central theme today is that the major problems that face our school system are really just artifacts. They're guaranteed byproducts of how we have decided to structure our school system. They flow from the fact that we govern our schools in a politically driven district structure where we assign kids to schools based on where they live. And that's why I support moving toward a system of choice, a choice-based system. Now, both of the problems I've just described would basically disappear in a system where parents can choose the school that best fits their child's needs. We'd no longer trap kids in a school that doesn't fit their needs, and we'd have basically a permanent ceasefire in the ideological wars, because parents would no longer have to take over the political process and prevail in the political arena. They could simply take their child to a school that better fit their values. And there are several ways that we, as a state of Oregon, could bring this evolution towards a choice-based system about. I personally do not favor vouchers as the best mechanism to do that. I support a more comprehensive and incremental system that combines a bunch of strategies like public school open enrollment, charter schools, and a combination of tax credit strategies that make sure that no single student is denied an educational opportunity because of the family that he or she was born into. But don't get me wrong, I don't think school choice is a panacea. I don't think it's going to solve every single challenge, every single struggle, every single problem that our school system faces. In fact, nothing would. In an enterprise as complex as educating our youth, there is no perfect. There's no such thing as a panacea. But I will suggest that if we move away from our 19th century structure of our school system and toward a choice-based system, we will have less inequality in our system, far less conflict in our schools, and better academic results. I look forward to this conversation. Thank you very much.
Can somebody turn these on? Are these on? Where's this? Are we on? So I would like to start with the issue that both of you raised, which is, in many respects, as you look at Portland, if you're looking at choice as a strategy to improve the quality of the public system, there are many schools in the city, not just within the Portland district, but the 4 other districts in the city, David Douglas, Centennial, Reynolds, Park Rose, that are doing a fabulous job, especially at the elementary school level. But as Peter mentioned, and I think Rob talked as well, there are many kids of color and poor kids who are, at this point, not doing well in the public schools. How do you think, Peter, I'd like to start with you, how do you see choice or the other dynamics that you talked about in terms of principal leadership, quality teaching, and curriculum? What are the wedges or the best shots at addressing that issue where, for 30 years, people like Tony Hobson and Ronnie have said that the Jefferson High School model is not working for our kids. We've tried many of those approaches. How would you approach in a policy or strategic way the issues that face many of our middle school and high school students in the city?
Well, thanks, Cynthia, for that really easy question. I'll just key off of something. Actually, Rob and I share a lot in common, so things that both of us talked about. I don't think it's any one thing. I think we have to look at it as a comprehensive problem that has both social and economic roots as well as educational roots. For many years, minorities have been shut out of by and large, have been shut out of the educational system. To create an integrated school system that meets the needs of these youngsters, here's the elements that I think are really required. We must recruit more minority teachers to the system. That's a key. We must find school leaders who understand not only the students, but the communities in which these students live. That's another key component. Choice can play actually quite an important role in this, both within the neighborhood, creating schools that will be relevant to the kids' interests, and those schools could range from all the way from an art school to a technical school to a traditional academic school. They shouldn't be too big. They should definitely be grounded in the community. and supported amply by Portland Public Schools. The other part of this picture, the choice I think can be helpful, is I agree with Rob on this. I think we both said more or less the same thing. I think people have a right to have an option to go to a school right as they're going to school that really meets their needs. So an open enrollment policy that is supported by, realistically, transportation costs, perhaps subsidies to the schools that are receiving these youngsters, and other mechanisms so that these youngsters can go to schools outside their neighborhood.
I'd like Rob to comment on the same question about Jefferson and Roosevelt and just point out that the Portland District at this point has tightened up on its transfer policy for kids from some of these chronically low achieving schools in the inner city. And really you have a demand issue, but a supply side problem is there's not enough high-performing high schools for those young people, whether it's 1,000 or 2,000 of them, to actually exit to if they exercise their rights. So we have a lack of maybe will or knowledge or capacity to create schools that are the places that are in your vision that work for all young people, including kids of color. Rob, what's your approach to this?
Cynthia, I agree. I think it is in large a supply-side problem. Look what we're asking the Portland School Board to do. They have 90 or so schools in the Portland School District. However, that number obviously is decreasing. They're asked to own and operate 90 different schools with dramatically different geographic neighborhoods, demographic neighborhoods, and figure out what's best for each of those schools. I would submit to you that's an impossible job. It can't happen. A single board does not have enough information to be able to adequately manage 90 schools with that type of diversity. We need to invite in school operators who have a history and a track record of raising academic achievement with whatever population they're dealing with. And we do have examples all over the nation of charter school organizations who are successful at operating inner city schools with exactly the type of demographic we see at Roosevelt and at Jefferson. For instance, the KIPP Academy. KIPP Academy is a wonderful organization. They are begging to come to the city of Portland and to start a school in our urban neighborhoods and do what they've done in about 30 other neighborhoods all over the country. So I think it is a supply problem. We now kind of have a system where it's a closed supply, where our system says, no, we can offer all the options that we need. We can manage this ourselves. And I think we need to open it up and to allow innovators to come in from the outside and try out the schools that have a track record and put them into our neighborhoods. And that's where I think school choice can be a real benefit to helping improve our public school system.
For those that missed the New York Times Magazine on Sunday, you should go online and get it, but it had a really thoughtful piece on exactly what Rob was talking about in terms of some other cities' experiments with new school creation and charters, especially at the high school and middle school level, that are getting great results for kids of color and poor kids, where the public schools actually, for too long, failed those kids. Who, in your opinion, Peter, and then Rob, if we wanted to make sure whether it was in the school district prerogative or in sending charters or new school creation in the city of Portland, who would be the right people to crank up that discussion in our community? Why hasn't it happened? Why are we still here 30 years with a legacy of letting too many kids down in our especially our middle and high schools?
Well, I think the Portland Schools Foundation ought to crank up this conversation.
You're on the board.
Well, you know, I agree. I think that we lack the political will in some ways to really grapple with this. And there are probably less obstacles than we really imagine. Here's how I think we might be able to have some of these innovations. One is that we need to have a civic engagement. There needs to be this kind of meeting and other meetings where people are actually able to discuss these issues. We need to hear a lot more from the parents. We need to hear a lot more from the parents, particularly of poor students, what they would like, what they would desire, what kind of curriculum would make sense. We have to be, you know, I don't want to say this in a harsh way, but we have a pretty unified view of what it is to be educated. We need to broaden that view. And we do need to be, we do need to be open to alternatives, charter school companies and so forth, as long as, and they can do a good job, as long as as long as they are really, truly understand what the educational mission of Portland Public Schools is. And some do, and perhaps some don't, but some do. Rob had mentioned the KIPP Academy, and I've had the experience of knowing the founders of the KIPP Academy and visiting their schools. And you know, when you first visit a KIPP Academy and you're sort of a liberal educator like myself, you're kind of like, wow. But in actual fact, they have been very successful. And they have developed a curriculum that's made a huge difference in the lives and the families of those kids. So those things, I think, are really worth experimenting with.
Rob, your point of view?
I have a little bit different perspective. I've observed over the last 30 years or so, since I've been an adult, that we have these intractable problems in our school system. And why is it that the system itself has not been able to deal with these problems? What is it about the way we've structured our school system that it, unlike virtually every other industry on the face of the earth, has not improved over time, yet it seems to be in kind of a long-term decline? And I think it's because, as in my opening comments, our school system is operated through a political process. What do we know about political processes? They tend to be co-opted by people with concentrated or vested interests, who then are able to oppose reforms that threaten their vested interests. So at the school district level and even at the state level, we have a system that is dominated by special interests who oppose reforms that would allow for the type of innovation and for the type of dynamic that would improve it over the long term. I personally have fought these battles at school district level and at the state level, so I've seen this up close and personal. I think the answer is because we have a politically determined school system. And if we want to improve that in the long term, we have to take it out of the political realm.
Rob, could you give us one specific example of how the political system at the state level and then one in the city, in the place people live here, Portland, has gotten in the way of making a difference in the lives and education for children?
I sure can. I sure can. In fact, we have an example sitting at tables with us right here today. These folks at this front two tables are from an organization called Optima. They're from Beaverton, and they're very, very unhappy with the math curriculum that Beaverton has adopted district-wide. Now, this is how this works. There's a political process that determines what math curriculum schools use. They have a committee, a recommendation goes to a board, and then a majority vote. And now whatever math curriculum is adopted is applied generally to every single school in the district. Now, what if you're a parent of a child who doesn't work well with that curriculum? What is your choice? Well, the political system said, no, we're going to adopt math curriculum A. But even if there's a relatively large group of parents for whom that math curriculum does not work, they're out of luck. All they can do is go into that political system and hope to prevail. They don't have, say, a pressure release or an outlet for that. And so now you have a group of disgruntled customers, if you will, for the system who would dearly love to stay in the public school system, but in many regards are forced to be out of it because it's not serving their needs, because we have a political process determining that outcome. At the state level, same types of things happen. Now, I was involved with the fight to get the charter school law passed in 1999. And, might as well name it, the teachers union was the entity that opposed the charter school law. And it's very easy to see why they would. I mean, they have a vested interest in not seeing a competitive school system where the one provider might end up on the losing end of the competitive process. And there are lots of individual kind of financial reasons why a teacher union organization would oppose a competitive public school system, because they benefit from the current structure of it. And so they have a very big shadow at the legislature, and a shadow that I think is increasing.
It's actually interesting back east that has had more experience because they have the demographic changes in our cities have sort of taken hold long before they've hit Portland, and they've had to experiment with new school creation and charters, is that many of the teachers union, primarily the AFT, are actually operating charters because some of these issues of district, one-size-fits-all, curriculum adoptions have led teachers unions to say, in this place that we want to create fabulous places of learning for all kids, some of our teachers' voices and ideas about how to do things differently and still get kids to standard or know content can be better decided at the school level. So it's interesting to see that the teachers' unions in some places are embracing charter schools as a way to go for autonomy and still results.
If I could jump in on
Sure.
that one point, Cynthia, I think that's very true. I've been very happy to work with a number of teachers in helping them found charter schools, teachers who had a vision for how a charter school might work, and they can achieve true professionalism by becoming operators of their own school. Now, generally in Oregon, their union opposes their own effort, but I've helped many teachers start their own public school, and it's been very rewarding, and those are some of the best schools, best charter schools that have been started in Oregon.
I'd like to ask you, Pete, did the mic go off? Are we ready to move already? Okay.
We've come to that point in the program where we will take questions from those of you who are in the audience. A privilege of membership in City Club is to ask a question of a speaker. The question should be 30 seconds or less. It should end with a question mark, and it should not resemble a speech. Our first question will be asked by our board host today, who is Norma Paulus. She is on the City Club Board of Governors. Norma has a rich history of public service in Oregon, including service in the legislature for 6 years, serving as Secretary of State and as State Superintendent of Public Instruction. Norma was the first woman in Oregon to be elected to statewide office. Norma.
Thank you. I do have a question for you, but you may have already answered it for all I know, because as a member of the audience, I've always been able to hear every word spoken up here, but sitting up here, I find that there is an echoing effect, so I'm sorry I have not heard what you've said. I will listen to it on the radio. My question is, the single greatest problem in my mind in public education today, and for maybe the last 15 or 20 years, has been the quality of instruction. Most particularly in math and science. It has been very difficult to entice those that get math degrees or science degrees into the world of education. Why would you go into a public school if you could take your math degree into Intel, get paid more, and have a much secure, more safer environment? So that is a really serious problem. We do have many qualified math and science teachers, but more often than not, they are with the fast-track kids, not the Hoseas and Marias. All children are entitled to have algebra and other math subjects and science subjects. So my question to you is, what would your proposals do to assist in solving that problem? Thank you. And now I'm going to go down there and listen to see what you have to say. Thank you.
Peter, you go.
Well, Norma, as we were talking about school choice, I started out with the very premise that any school improvement strategy begins in the classroom with teaching, leadership, and curriculum. If you don't take that as your North Star, then you don't know what really constitutes a really great classroom, whether it's a regular school or a charter school or a KIPP school, and they can all do it. So I would agree with you. The place to start to think about school choice is not in the governance or in the politics or in the economics, but in the classroom. If we don't attract qualified math and science teachers, we are in deep trouble, not only here, but across the globe. Now the question is, how can you get a relatively small school, a charter school, because we agree small learning communities probably do better, to spend the amount of time and effort it would take to teach in that school and maybe forego earnings in Intel or other places. And that's why I started out as a teacher, so you'll know where it's coming from. I love teachers. They ought to be paid in a way that allows them to do their work. But they must also, there's a few teachers in the audience, but they must also be held accountable as well, because that's the real definition of professionalism, a doctor or a lawyer or a teacher. And I'm not sure that we've figured this out as well as we might at this moment.
I'd actually disagree with Peter on this one a little bit, to the extent that I do think this is a governance issue. I think our governance system does get in the way of high teacher quality. Let me give you two specific examples of exactly how. I'm lucky enough to be the co-founder of a group of charter schools called the Arthur Academy Neighborhood Public Schools. Chuck Arthur is my co-founder. Chuck Arthur is a 30-year public school teacher who teaches by way of a curriculum based out of the University of Oregon and taught in the Reynolds School District for many years, very, very successfully, teaching every single first grader and second grader that he taught to read and do math up to standard. Now, this Reynolds School District was not particularly interested in allowing his system, not his system, but the curriculum that he was using to be applied to other classrooms, even though it was extraordinarily successful. In frustration, he retired as a public school teacher, and I helped him open up the first Arthur Academy charter school. Now, he not only has one classroom, but he has 4 different schools, which will eventually be K-5, and he'll eventually have as many as 11 schools to be able to bring his teaching effectiveness to more and more kids. That would not have happened without the charter school law. Now, number 2, our teacher licensure programs actually get in the way of quality education. And here's one way it does that. We have lots of certified teachers teaching science classes, although they're not certified to teach science, they're certified to teach some other content area. And we prevent scientists who don't have a teaching certificate from coming into those classes and teaching science. So we actually have a mismatch of the abilities of teachers in the classrooms we're asking them to teach, which is caused by this artificial requirement of a teaching license. That again is the system's governance getting in the way of high teacher quality.
Okay, first question, and if you'd like, please direct your question at one of the speakers.
Thank you. My name is Mike Mahalik. I'm a City Club member, and I'm the parent who started this Beaverton Optimum Group about a year ago. I'd like to thank all 3 of you. My question is, why do we allow ineffective teachers to continue teaching in the classroom? And how can people like me, who is a scientist and engineer, who has lots of free time, why am I prevented from teaching in the classroom?
Well, Mike, I would agree that, let's take, you had really two parts to your question. How can we, as a profession, exit people who are not performing to a standard that we think are really helping the kids? And to be candid with you, I think that is a true issue within the school systems in generally. The question of tenure and the question of protecting folks no matter what is something that those of us who are in the teaching profession have to look in the mirror and ask ourselves some fundamental questions about. So I would agree with that. As far as your teaching in the classroom, I think it'd be a great idea. I have to tell you, one of the best schools that I ever went to was in New York City. It was an all Dominican neighborhood, had all the urban problems that you can possibly imagine. Every single year, this school met their standards and exceeded them. None of these kids came to the school speaking English, by the way. And why was that? Because they opened their doors to the parents, they opened the doors to the grandparents. English and Spanish were spoken freely. They used the school as a community center. And what happened is that in different ways, kids did, the grandparents would come and read and so forth and so on. So I am actually an advocate for open doors in schools, and when talented people want to come up and help the kids, I think there should be a very low bar as to whether that would be possible or not.
I agree with Dr. Cookson on that one. The short answer to your question is the reason you can't go into a classroom and teach is because the union contract won't allow it, and that's a short answer. Luckily, these days, in charter schools, that is available. You can teach in a charter school without a teacher license, and so that kind of small crack has been created in that edifice. Now, I agree with Dr. Cookson, though. I think that that's one of the ways we can really involve our community in our schools is by inviting in, James DePriest is not allowed to teach music in our high schools. Now, that's absurd. John Kitzhaber could not teach anatomy in one of our high schools. Here's how absurd it gets. but James DePriest could teach a teacher how to teach at Lewis and Clark College. That's okay, but he can't teach in our schools. What a great idea. Yeah, exactly. So it doesn't make much sense, and I think we really need to invite the community into our public schools by relaxing those rules on who can teach. I think the best person to decide who is and who is not qualified to teach in a school is the principal and the administration of that school, not some disconnected bureaucracy called the Teacher Standards and Practices Commission down in Salem, who is necessarily answering to a different master.
Hi, Joanne Kahn, City Club member. I wanted to ask you about schools as a place of shared experience. We've talked a lot about people being able to move to where they feel comfortable and basically giving them the opportunity to group with people like themselves. But one of the advantages of public school, I think, is being able to meet people who aren't just like yourselves. And so I wanted to see what you think, if there is anything you think ought to be taught across all schools.
Sure, I'll start with that one. I think there are things that should be tested for and required across all schools, and they would mostly be in the academic realm. We know what skills we want kids to have at each grade, and I think we can quickly, easily test for those skills. Now, I think I sense where your question is going, though. It's a very important issue, and I'd like to address that for just a second. What do we do? Do we allow people to segregate themselves via school choice into a cloistered community of, let's say all white or all black or all Muslim? And I think all of us are kind of uncomfortable with that if it was an eventuality that came from a choice-based system. Luckily, and I think it's a concern we should watch, luckily that's not what's happening in the localities that have a lot of school choice, say in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where 18,000 kids are in a voucher program, or in Washington, D.C., where fully 15% of the kids are in charter schools. What's actually happening is these schools are serving more minorities. There's more diversity in the schools of choice than there are in the schools that are created by the neighborhoods and where people live.
I think in my introductory remarks, I think there are things, there are values and understandings that go across the school system that all students need to be able to come in contact with and to share. What we don't want to do is create a fragmented school system, and I think Rob and I agree on a lot. I have some concern that by deregulating this too much, we create a fragmented system. And I actually am of the belief that there are certain things having to do with American history, having to do with a variety of others, math and science, that ought to be fairly strongly emphasized in schools across the boards so that we have this shared experience and shared understanding as a platform for shared civic life.
My name is Jonathan Rodmacher. I'm a City Club member. My question perhaps arises from Mr. Kremer's analogy. I don't look forward to meeting my friends at my doctor, and I don't think a sane policymaker would want to try and build community by having people in the waiting room talk about their illnesses. I think there's a value to neighbors sending their kids to the same school from whatever neighborhood or community that comes from. Doesn't school choice implicitly remove that policy advantage of having people from a like community and neighborhood send all their kids together, meet each other, and play together?
It's a very interesting question, and it's something that really deserves a serious answer. And the question really is, do we value community schools so much that we would be comfortable with restricting people's choices who didn't want to go to that community school? And really what we're talking about is competing values, if you will. I think the notion of a neighborhood school is a really attractive notion too. But if that school isn't providing my child with what my child needs educationally, I don't think I should be required to send my kid to that school. And so in the balance of competing values, it's not really a close one for me. I'll go with what's best in the educational interests of the kids, and I think the parents are the best to choose that. Now, if they value their local neighborhood school to that extent, they will choose it, and therefore we will have what you consider to be the benefit of the neighborhood schools.
I think that the idea of the common school is still as viable today as when Thomas Jefferson thought about it, but we need to rethink a little bit what we mean by a common school. And it may be in the neighborhood, but it also may be in the adjacent neighborhood as well. But the common values that Jefferson was talking about, I think, are as valid today as they were 200 years ago.
Steve Novick, City Club member. The Times Magazine article that Cynthia mentioned said that the charter schools that have successfully addressed the achievement gap are schools that have longer hours than the normal school, longer school years, teachers working 15-hour days, and the author essentially concluded that the only way to address the achievement gap is to give disadvantaged kids, in effect, more equal education than advantaged kids. And I was curious how Dr. Cookson and the rest of the panel viewed that conclusion. Do you agree with it?
That there was more education is how the gap was closed?
Right, giving them essentially a more equal, to turn a phrase, education than the advantaged kids.
Well, you know, the definition of equality of education can mean that everybody gets the same, or that some people have additional resources in order to come, you know, to the bar. And I'm not against that in principle at all, but I would like to just make one footnote, because I have visited a lot of charter schools and studied them, and when I was at Teachers College, we had a whole charter school center and so forth, so I'm supportive of it. But one of my concerns is that actually it's a pretty demanding environment, and the burnout rate for many people working in these schools is really high. And so, you know, from that point of view, I don't know what the long-term prognosis is for some of these schools.
I'm sorry to say that we're out of time. I hope the speakers will stick around and allow those of you who didn't get to ask your questions to ask them later. On behalf of City Club of Portland, I would like to thank Peter Cookson, Rob Kremer, and Cynthia Guyer for a really interesting and enlightening discussion. I'd also like to thank those of you who are here today, members and guests, for your interest in City Club, and I'd also like to thank our TV and radio audience for listening. Thank you again, and we are adjourned.